So it is Sunday, January 25, 2026. And if you are anywhere near Minneapolis right now, or, honestly, just scrolling through your feed, the mood is, well, it's not just tense. It's heavy.
It's confusing.
Yeah, confusing. You have the National Guard activated. You have trucks rolling through American streets. Tens of thousands of people are marching in the cold. And right at the center of this storm, there's a dead man, a grieving family, and two stories that, well, they just can't both be true.
It's a collision. That's really the only word for it. We're seeing this high-velocity collision between a federal narrative and a local reality. And when those two things crash, you get the chaos we're seeing this morning.
Which is exactly why we're doing this deep dive. We can't just read the headlines today. Our mission is to cut through the absolute wall of noise from the last 24 hours. We need to figure out exactly what happened to Alex Pretti. But then we have to do something harder. We need to zoom out, way out, and ask if we're watching a historical pattern repeat itself.
And pattern is the key word there. We're not here to speculate or, monger fear. To keep us grounded, we're working from a very specific, very strict stack of sources today. We're looking strictly at reporting from Reuters and the Associated Press.
So no press releases from the agencies involved?
No, we're explicitly excluding federal press releases unless they've been vetted and reported through these independent wires. The goal here is to look at what can be verified by third parties, or at least where independent observation seems to dispute the official line. We want the ground truth, not the spin.
Okay, so let's get into that ground truth. To understand the temperature in Minneapolis, we have to look at the spark. Yesterday, January 24, a man named Alex Jeffrey Pretti was shot and killed. But this didn't just happen in a vacuum, did it? The city was already on a razor's edge.
Right. You absolutely cannot understand the reaction to Alex Pretti's death without looking at the calendar. Less than 3 weeks ago, on January 7, another U.S. citizen, Renee Good, was killed by an ICE officer. So the community was already raw. They were already mourning. I mean, this isn't just a debate about immigration policy anymore. It's morphed into a crisis about authority. It's about transparency. And really, fundamentally, it's about who gets to use lethal force on American soil and why.
Let's focus on the incident itself. January 24, Alex Pretti. When you see the initial blurbs on your phone, it's just, 37-year-old male subject, a statistic. But the AP reporting goes a lot deeper. Who was this guy?
And these details matter. They matter because they paint a picture of who is actually in these streets. Alex Pretti was a 37-year-old American citizen. He was an intensive care nurse at a VA hospital in Minneapolis.
That detail just jumped out at me immediately. He worked at the VA, so he spent his life caring for veterans.
Exactly. He wasn't some, agitator looking for a fight. Colleagues quoted in the AP report describe him as compassionate, thoughtful. He was a former research scientist. This was a caregiver. His family said he was active in social justice, specifically because he was disturbed by the impact of federal raids on his neighbors. He was the guy who showed up to help.
So you have this ICU nurse, this community member who cares for vets, dead after an encounter with a U.S. Border Patrol officer. And this is where the narrative just splits in two.
Yeah.
If we look at the federal claim, the one reported by Reuters, what's the official story?
Well, the official line, again, as relayed by Reuters, is that a Border Patrol agent fired because the subject, who we assume is Pretti, approached officers with a handgun and resisted being disarmed. Yeah. The legal justification they're building is self-defense against an immediate armed threat.
Approach with a handgun. That's a very specific, very visual claim.
Yeah.
If that's true, it seems like a clear-cut case. Officer safety, right?
Would be.
But Reuters and the AP are reporting that bystander video tells a story that isn't just different. It's the polar opposite.
This is the moment. This is where the consensus reality just fractures. Reuters reviewed bystander footage that shows Pretti in the moments right before the shooting. And in the video, he isn't holding a gun. He is holding a mobile phone.
He was filming them?
He was filming the agents. The reporting describes him moving between the officers and other community members, people who had just been pepper sprayed. He looks like he's trying to document what's happening.
And the discrepancy gets even darker than just phone versus gun, doesn't it? The timeline in that video, it seems to completely undermine the whole self-defense argument.
It does. The video appears to show agents pinning Pretti to the ground. He is immobilized. And then, while he is already on the ground, pinned by these agents, another agent fires at him multiple times.
Well, let's just pause there. If he's pinned to the ground, how does the approached with a handgun narrative even survive that?
That is the massive legitimacy gap we are facing right now. Local police did confirm Pretti was a lawful gun owner. He had a permit, but the visual evidence cited by the AP shows him with a phone in his hand. It raises this terrible question. Was the mere presence of a concealed weapon, which he was licensed to carry, used to justify a shooting that happened while he was already subdued?
It changes the entire texture of the event. It shifts it from officer safety to something that look a lot like an extrajudicial execution.
And that shift is why the city has exploded. When the official story is, he attacked us, but the video shows we killed him while he was pinned, trust just evaporates instantly.
Let's talk about that explosion. Governor Tim Walz activates the Minnesota National Guard. Now, I think when most people hear National Guard, they think martial law. They think the government is cracking down. Is that what's happening here?
It's a common misconception. But no, we need to be really precise about what this move means. It is not martial law. Activating the Guard is what political scientists call a threshold moment. It's an admission by the state government that the situation, crowd management, protecting infrastructure, it's just outstripped what the city police can handle.
But there's a strange twist here, right?
Yeah.
Usually, the Guard is brought in to support the police or the status quo. But Governor Walz and Mayor Jacob Frey are explicitly condemning the federal operations.
And that's the nuance that makes this so volatile. You have the state of Minnesota using its Guard to keep the peace, while at the same time criticizing the federal agents operating within its borders. Walz and Frey are calling for these raids to stop. So you have this state versus federal conflict where the Guard is almost acting as a buffer.
It feels like two different governments are operating in the same zip code, but with totally different rule books.
That's exactly how the residents feel. Reuters is reporting tens of thousands marching. The chants are icy out. Clergy members are getting arrested. The scale is huge. But listen to the language the residents are using. They're describing it as a full federal occupation.
Occupation. That is a loaded word.
It's a military word. It tells you that for the people living there, this doesn't feel like law enforcement serving the community. It feels like an external force acting without local consent. The grievance isn't just about immigration policy anymore. It's about these militarized tactics, a total lack of transparency about the shootings, and zero local oversight.
It's the feeling that there are two sets of rules. One for the people who live there, and another for the people with the federal badges.
Precisely. And that feeling, that breakdown of the rule of law into special rules for certain agents, is a perfect segue to the historical context. Because while these events are happening in 2026, the mechanics of it, well, we've seen them before.
Okay, let's go there. Let's look at the historical lens. But we need a disclaimer first, right?
Right.
Because people love to jump to the most extreme comparisons. We are not saying the U.S. in 2026 is Nazi Germany.
No, and I want to be very, very precise about that. History doesn't repeat, but it can rhyme. Historians and political scientists, they look for patterns of democratic degradation. They look at the mechanics of how a democracy slides into something else. And there are parallels in the source material regarding 1930s Germany that are uncomfortable, but, they're necessary to discuss if we want to understand the risk.
Let's start with this concept called emergency logic. This came up in the analysis. What does that actually mean?
Okay, so think back to the Reichstag fire decree of 1933. People always focus on the fire itself, the act of arson.
Yeah.
But the real damage to the democracy wasn't the fire, it was the legal reaction to it. It was the normalization of emergency measures. The government argued that temporary safety measures, suspending civil liberties, bypassing warrants, were necessary to protect the public.
It's just for now, just until we catch the bad guys, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But the temporary part, it didn't turn out to be so temporary. The emergency became the standard operating procedure, and that is the pattern to watch in Minneapolis. When you have federal agents operating under special or emergency protocols that bypass local oversight, and those operations result in the deaths of Americans like Renee Good and Alex Pretti, you have to ask, when does the emergency end?
If there's no oversight, the exception just becomes the rule.
Correct. The emergency becomes a permanent state of affairs that justifies bypassing the Constitution. It becomes a loophole that just swallows the law.
And that leads right into the second pattern. Central versus local authority. We are seeing a governor and a mayor basically shouting into the void against a federal agency.
This is a classic friction point. In the 1930s, one of the first things the Central Party did was override local state constraints. They needed to make sure that a local official couldn't stop the central will. In Minnesota, we're seeing a friction that proves we aren't there yet, but the pressure is immense. The fact that federal agents can operate in Minneapolis despite the mayor and governor demanding they leave, that shows a centralization of power, that is.
Well, it's very reminiscent of that period.
There was a German word in the research, Gleichschaltung. Can you help me with that?
You're close. It's Gleichschaltung. It translates roughly to coordination or bringing into line. It's an engineering term, actually, like engaging gears so they all spin at the same speed.
That sounds bureaucratic, but in this context, it sounds terrifying.
It's the process of aligning all institutions under one control. In the modern context, the risk isn't one-party rule overnight. The risk is the pressure put on independent institutions, courts, local governments, the press to conform. So if the press reports on the shooting, they get labeled as enemies. If the local government tries to investigate, they get stonewalled.
Exactly. If you delegitimize the institutions that are supposed to check your power, you are engaging in a form of Gleichschaltung. You're coordinating the narrative to exclude dissent. You make it so the only truth is the one coming from the center.
But this brings us to the good news part of the analysis, though, because the analogy isn't perfect, is it?
No, it breaks down. And this is so crucial for you to understand. We do not have an enabling act that has legally collapsed the separation of powers. The fact that Reuters and the AP are reporting these conflicting narratives, that they are reviewing bystander video and publishing it, that proves the coordination hasn't happened yet.
The gears are grinding, but they haven't been stripped.
Right. The press is still working. The governor is still activating the guard. The plural power centers of America are still fighting. The system is stressed. It's flashing red, but it is still functioning.
So we aren't in a dictatorship, but we are walking a very, very thin tightrope.
Yes. We're at a tipping point, and that's why this moment matters so much.
So what does this all mean for tomorrow or next week? The analysis laid out 3 possible scenarios. Let's walk through them, starting with the best case.
The best case is accountability. In this scenario, independent investigations are actually allowed to happen. Evidence is preserved. The video of Alex Pretti is treated as evidence in court, not just suppressed. Federal operations are narrowed or paused.
What's the indicator? What should we look for to know if we're on that path?
Access. Simple as that. Do state investigators get access to the federal agents who fired the shots? If we see headlines saying federal agents cooperate with state inquiry, that's the off-ramp. That means the rule of law is holding.
Okay, scenario 2, the most plausible one, chronic instability.
This is where we are likely heading if nothing changes. The protests continue, the federal deployments continue, you get a stalemate, the community keeps marching, the agents keep deploying gas. Every night becomes a roll of the dice for another tragedy.
So it just becomes a war of attrition. Minneapolis stays on fire, metaphorically, or maybe literally for months.
Yeah.
A sort of localized frozen conflict.
Exactly. And that instability is so dangerous because it can lead to scenario 3, the authoritarian drift. This is the real risk.
The ratchet effect.
Right, the ratchet effect. Imagine a tool that only turns one way. In this scenario, every crisis, every protest, every clash is used to justify more force. The government says, look at this chaos. We need more power to stop it. They frame the protesters as domestic terrorists. They block oversight completely.
So instead of the chaos leading to reform, the chaos is used as the excuse to crack down harder. We have to destroy the village to save it.
Precisely. That is the historical trap. You create the instability, and then you offer authoritarianism as the only solution to the instability you helped create.
That is. Well, it's chilling.
Yeah.
So if I'm listening to this, and I'm in Minneapolis, or even just watching from afar, what are people actually doing? Because the reporting suggests people aren't just sitting around.
No, and this is fascinating. The reporting from Reuters and AP highlights a shift in community tactics. It's moving from just anger to community protection. People are shifting from posting opinions on social media to structured evidence capture.
Like the person who filmed Alex Pretti.
Exactly. That wasn't an accident. That's a tactic. We are seeing time-stamped video, legal observers who wear neon hats and write down badge numbers. There's a rise in mutual aid neighbors, feeding neighbors, and these nonviolent discipline plans for demonstrations.
It sounds like they're building their own infrastructure of accountability.
They are. This isn't just a mob. It's a community trying to create a structure of safety that they feel the state is no longer providing. They're saying, if you won't keep us safe and if you won't tell the truth, we will document it ourselves.
Yeah, and legally, that documentation is the most powerful weapon they have against that emergency logic we talked about. It preserves the truth when the official narrative tries to erase it.
It forces the system to acknowledge reality.
We've covered a lot of ground. The incident with Alex Pretti, the National Guard, the historical parallels, the future scenarios. As we wrap up, I keep going back to Alex. He was a nurse. He was filming. He thought he was doing the right thing.
It all comes back to that. We're looking at a specific tragedy that is serving as a stress test for the entire federal structure. It's a clash of narratives, the official report versus the citizen video. And it's a clash of powers, the state of Minnesota versus the federal government.
And for you, listening, why should you care if you aren't in Minneapolis? Why does this matter to someone in Austin or Seattle or Miami?
Because history doesn't stay in one city. Understanding these patterns, like emergency logic, like the ratchet effect, it helps you spot where we are on the timeline. If it can happen in Minneapolis, if federal authority can just override local safety there, the precedent is set for everywhere else. The boundaries of what is acceptable are being redrawn right now.
It's not just a Minnesota story, it's an American story.
It is, and it raises the most fundamental quality of governance.
Which brings us to our final thought. We've talked about the danger of temporary measures becoming permanent.
Right.
So, here's what I want you to think about. If the temporary measures used in Minneapolis, the suspension of local oversight, the use of force on citizens like Alex Pretti, become the standard operating procedure for public safety across the country, at what point does the emergency actually end?
And if local oversight is effectively removed from federal policing, who is left to watch the watchers?
That's the question. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. Stay safe out there.